Occasionally things get in the way, but that's where an experienced lawyer comes into it. Not because we're necessarily clever. We are very clever. But it's to do with the fact that we are very experienced. We've been doing this for many years. I've just hit 10 years myself doing this. And the idea is that we can see the speed bumps coming down the road. We can prepare people for the difficulties.
Welcome to Listen Without Prejudice, your exclusive gateway to one of London's leading law firms. In each episode, we dive deep into the stories, insights, and expertise that make Bishop Sewell a trusted name in the legal community. Join us as we explore everything from the latest legal trends and case studies to practical advice on residential and commercial property, corporate and commercial law, employment, family and divorce matters, private clients, and dispute resolution. Whether you're a legal professional, a client, or simply curious about the law, Listen Without Prejudice is here to inform, inspire, and engage. Now, without further ado, let's get the conversation started.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Mark Chick, Senior Partner at Bishop Sewell. With me is Charlie Davidson, Senior Associate in our conveyancing team, and we're going to be talking about what to look for when buying a property as a first-time buyer. Charlie, hello, welcome.
Hello, Mark.
How are you?
Well, it's a very busy day for conveyancing, but always happy to seek here with anyone to talk about conveyancing because it's all I ever talk.
It's your favourite subject.
It's my only subject.
Okay, well, let's just start this right back at the beginning then. So this is very much aimed at first-time buyers who've not bought a property before. What should be going through your mind? What should they be thinking about?
It's a long road from offer to ownership, unfortunately. I mean, most people, when they come to us, as you know, have had a months, maybe even years of saving and looking and finding a property. And sometimes they think this is the final bit. They've got their lawyers. This is now the end bit. Unfortunately, it's just the beginning of the final stage. The lawyers advising, consulting, the papers, the money, it's a fraught process. I think I read somewhere that conveyancing is one of the most stressful things a person can go through, up there with death and taxes. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, while death and taxes are inevitable, some people think, well, maybe I shouldn't buy a property. Most people will, though, because it still stands out as a very good investment.
Significant investment and a significant milestone, perhaps, in people's lives, absolutely, and something people get very emotionally attached to.
Well, it's a classic, isn't it, though? The day you get married, your first child, and when you get the keys to your first home. It's a big emotional moment, and one of the better parts of this job is when you're able to have that phone call with a first-time buyer saying they can pick the keys up. But that can sometimes take a while to get to that phone call. So I think let's talk about stages.
I was going to say, so that's some way down the road, isn't it? So let's just go right back to the beginning. So, those basic considerations, what should someone be thinking about? They found the property of their dreams. They've been to the estate agent. Their offer's perhaps been accepted. What comes next?
Well, naturally, the next step is twofold. The first one is you've got to get your financing in order. Most people will have already got an agreement in principle from a bank, maybe several banks, to provide the mortgage. So they need to kickstart that process now they've actually found the property. And the second big step is choosing your lawyer. Most people, the first time they will ever talk to a solicitor or even instruct one will be their conveyancing process. And it can seem a bit grown up, a bit intimidating. Oh, I need to instruct a solicitor, a very technical term for a conveyance, who will talk to me about covenants and leasehold. And it sounds very scary. But ultimately, you're finding someone who can advise you and shepherd you through a slightly alien process.
Indeed, I suppose that's right. And also, let's think back. You mentioned two things there. Obviously, perhaps is it freehold, is it leasehold? I mean, those are big topics in themselves. Subjects dear to my own heart. We probably won't go into that in too much detail.
We could do an entire series, we probably will, on leasehold property. But I think for the purposes of this, let's just presume that we've got a young couple buying a house in somewhere shire. Let's keep it nice and straightforward so you can understand the mechanism of conveyancing before we start adding in all the wonderful eccentricities of
Indeed. But part of the lawyer's job, I guess, is to check the title to make sure that what you're buying is what you think it is. And I think another big question is what's included and what's not included. I mean, that tends to be a big thing, that you see a property, it's got fixtures and fittings in it, it's got white goods. If somebody's already living in it, what are the thoughts that need to go through people's minds about that?
Well, the funny thing is, I normally tell clients, once they've instructed me and I say, right, I'm going to go off and do a lot of lawyering now and I'll be in touch later. But for the time being, you need to figure out what you actually want to buy in the contents. Because there's a whole host of case law about fittings and contents, whether it's included in the sale price, not included in the sale. And while it's nice to have case law on your side, it's much better to just avoid the argument. There's a one-size-fits-all form called the Fittings and Contents Form, TA10 for all the lawyers listening. And the idea is that it's filled out by the seller, the buyer has a look at it, and it's agreeing what you want to buy. Are you paying extra for the fitted fridge and freezer? You definitely don't want that bed. Is the cat included? Unfortunately, these are all questions I've had asked to me by clients. The general rule is, imagine a house being turned upside down. Anything that moves is presumed to be going with the sellers when they move out. If you want it to stay there, you're going to have a conversation. And I always tell people there's no such thing as a silly question. Even if you think, oh, they're definitely going to leave that wood-burning stove, it's all plumbed in. And then you find out they've taken the wood-burning stove. Ask the question.
Well, I think we've all seen those difficult cases where things like the light bulbs and things like that have been taken, and potentially door handles is another area where people might replace those with standard fittings. And so if there's something of particular interest, people have to really be clear about that.
There was one I had where a massive argument broke out regarding the removal of a very nice Victorian fireplace. And that, I mean, obviously that's the extreme end of this situation, but it was important that that conversation happens at the beginning. You need to have the rough idea of the shape of the deal. Because, yes, you are buying a house and everyone does it. You know, how many transactions take place every single day? But ultimately, you are buying something, you know, for a vast amount of money, probably the biggest thing you've ever bought in your lifetime. You've got to make sure that everyone's on the same page. There is what the Americans call a meeting of minds. You have an idea. So talk. I want to buy that fireplace. I don't want to sell you the fireplace. Well, talk about it. Because getting a conveyancer to argue over fittings and contents might be a way of nailing it down. It is not a value add.
Well, it's not a very good piece of legal spend, is it, really, to have a bit of litigation at the end of the transaction where somebody thought something was going to be included that wasn't?
The point of conveyancing at the end of the day is to avoid arguments. It's to avoid disagreement and to make sure everyone's on the same page. Because really, we're very lucky compared to our colleagues in litigation, because they are arguing over points that people don't agree with. But with us, someone wants to buy, someone wants to sell, there's always a deal to be done.
Should be a meeting of minds, shouldn't there?
There should be.
Yeah.
Occasionally things get in the way, but that's where an experienced lawyer comes into it. Not because we're necessarily clever. We are very clever. But it's to do with the fact that we are very experienced. We've been doing this for many years. I've just hit 10 years myself doing this. And the idea is that we can see the speed bumps coming down the road. We can prepare people for the difficulties before they reach them. And that's the...
Yeah, well, let's think about that. Some of those difficulties. Okay, we've talked a little bit about what is included, what's not included, maybe things in the garden and things like that can be moved around. But let's just think about that business of actually going to the estate agent, making an offer on somebody's property and that being accepted. What's the next step there?
Well, once you've had your offer accepted, you've got your lawyer in hand, you've got your bank ready to give you the money to buy the home. Your lawyer, certainly with me, will then be starting to get the draft papers from the selling solicitor and start to interrogate the title. Technical term, really, you're just looking at the title to make sure it is what it is. It's a freehold house, meaning there's no lease, there's no tenancy, you own the land, you own the building. In English law, that is basically the best form of ownership. You own the land all the way up to the sky and all the way down. That's the idea. You're then looking at what rights are there. I mean, you say, well, there's a car parking space. Do you own the car parking space? Is there a neighbour that has a right of way over the land? Do you expect to have a right of way over the land? The extension, did that have planning permission? Did it have building regulation? There's a whole host of questions that need to be thought about and answered. And generally, these don't come to first-time buyers because they just think, oh, it must be fine. 9 times out of 10, it normally is fine, but unfortunately, there's always the case where it's not fine. And given the numbers involved, you have to ask the question.
That's where the lawyers come in at the end of the day. Our job is to read the documents and make sure that things are as they should be. And of course, you're buying a leasehold property. Once again, that's something where you need to check the service charge, the ownership rights. Are there other things that go with that? And I think we won't go into that in full detail now. But when we get the agent on the phone or the client rings up saying that they've had their offer accepted, clearly there's this other possibility someone else might be still trying to buy the property. How can we sort of work our way around that one?
The sticky problem of subject to contract, which everyone thinks can be solved very well. To everyone who's listening to this and has never had this before, when you agree to buy a property, it's subject to contract, meaning that anyone can walk away from the deal, no questions asked. And that can be very deeply annoying, particularly if you are a buyer, you've invested time, effort, money into buying this property, only for the seller to turn around and say, give me an extra $50,000 or I'm selling to someone else. It's very annoying. Unfortunately, there's no real way of sorting that out because everyone who comes up with solutions to this and says, oh, well, we can do a lockout agreement, an exclusivity agreement, a non-refundable deposit. That's all based on the sometimes faulty premise that the property is absolutely perfect and you definitely want to buy it. Example, say you definitely want to buy this house and you put down a non-refundable deposit of, I don't know, £10,000, £20,000. It then turns out that there's a major issue. There's no planning for the extension. It's on contaminated land. Thames Water is about to knock it down and replace it with a fountain. I don't know. There could be any number of reasons. And you think, right, I don't want to buy this property. Is it then fair that you have to pay £20,000 for the benefit of not buying a property? There's a lot of due diligence involved and lots of things can go wrong. And people presume that just because you make an offer, that the deal can go through, or indeed it should go through. Yeah. And I'm never that comfortable in my buyers agreeing to agree to a contract. It starts getting more complicated.
It is just an agreement to agree. That's the absolute problem with it, isn't it, really? So you're going to basically buy time. You're going to get 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever, to get to an irrevocable exchange of contracts. But it's just simply that, a time in which they won't market it to anybody else. And having had that time and having paid for it, once the time has elapsed, whether you exchange or not, you don't get the money back.
It is a useful tool in the conveyancer's arsenal to have those agreements. I mean, I've drafted them, but a good lawyer will always advise their clients, particularly on the buying side, there needs to be a get-out-of-jail-free clause. There needs to be a provision in there that says that if the property, a reasonable person can't get financing or can't buy it, you're able to walk away and take your money back. But the idea being most people don't want frivolous, unreasonable people, the seller that then changes their mind at the last minute, or the buyer just goes off and says, oh, I'm bored of this now. That's the idea. But it's
this is the thing, I suppose. So what we're saying, I mean, maybe this isn't necessarily for the first-time buyer. Hopefully they're not
hopefully not no.
Competing hard for that asset that everybody wants to buy. But maybe there is that conversation needs to happen with the agent where you make sure the property is actually off the market, your offer has been accepted, and we are proceeding subject to contract, hopefully towards that happy day at which exchange will happen and they'll become irrevocably bound.
I mean, back in the day, it was they put the sole subject to contract sticker on the little placard in the front of their high street shop, which is still the case. But nowadays, most people will be checking Rightmove or Zoopla or any other number of online portals, and seeing that it is marked as subject to contract, which is what you want to do. You want to make sure that the seller isn't entertaining any buyers. They are focusing on you, because at that moment you've then started a very expensive process to move forward to buy the property. And the idea is that you can't really back away without consequences.
No, quite. And you don't want somebody else to come in and put in another competing bid, for instance, either. That's another thing.
No, of course. But that's again another subject for
another
a whole other podcast.
Indeed. Let's think a little bit about buying a property then. So obviously family members perhaps sometimes help each other out. There's the bank of mum and dad. What needs to get thought about there?
Oh, so boiling it down to what everyone's really worried about is anti-money laundering, or know your client, know your customer. The frustrating thing with most buyers when they come to us, though, because they've already had to go through a whole maze of people asking them, do you have the money? Do you have the money? You do have the money to buy this property? And they get very confused when they come to us, and I say, no, I'm not your mum. I'm going to presume you have the money because you're a grown-up. The question we need to ask is, well, how did you get this money? Where's it come from? What's it been doing for 3 months? Is anyone gifting you, extra money? On the one hand, is because we have obligations to make sure by statute, by the regulator, that we need to know where the money's come from, who's from legitimate sources. It's not fun, but it needs to be done. And there's also the problem of your bank. Most people are in a situation, they're not lucky enough to be able to buy a property with just a family loan or their own money. Sometimes, most of the time, they're getting a loan from a lender. And the lender wants to know, is there anyone else involved? It's not from them being worried for your own soul, or we're worried. But Barclays Bank doesn't go to buyers and say, we're really worried about you getting this loan from Aunt Gertrude because she's quite nasty to you. They don't care about that. They just want to know that at the end of the day, Aunt Gertrude can't come along and claim an interest in the property, so they demand that this is all sorted. Bank of Mum and Dad, I think, is now one of the top 10 lenders in the country by capital. And Mum and Dad will give money. It has to be a gift, a non-refundable gift.
Maybe that's the important point, isn't it, for our audience, that particularly that anyone who's assisting someone in a property purchase, unless they're acquiring interest in it, is going to have to be seen to gift that money to them, to not be able to get that money back. There are other things, of course. Maybe mum and dad want to help out in a situation where somebody's buying with a partner, and maybe they do want to protect their interest. That would be a totally different proposition, wouldn't it?
It is a different proposition, but then you're moving into the area of family law, cohabitation agreements. divorce in some cases, because ultimately you've got to think, well, the family money's gone in to buy this family home, but the family has broken up. What happens there? How do you preserve the wealth and that gift so it's on the right side of the balance sheet? It's a fraught question, and it's not an easy answer because it's
not really one that we can get into too much detail in here, but certainly something to think about. And certainly from the family perspective, if the family wanted to put a charge over the property, they could do so. But of course, they'd probably be sitting behind the bank, because the bank's not Barclays, to give your example, and not going to say, oh, hello, mum and dad, yes, that's fine, you come in first.
He who pays the piper calls the tune. The bank will always win. And unfortunately, one of the most frustrating things for buyers is they always ask us, why are you taking so long on these questions? Why do we have to do these searches? Why are you asking these questions? Half of the time, it's for your own benefit, Mr. Buyer, because you need to know what's going on. The other half of the time is because we have a Bible, a phone book of instructions from every single lender in the country, which says you must do this, you must do that. We don't like this. We might like this. Please write to us and we'll take 6 months to consider it. So we have to go through this whole process, which is why we have to ask about donors. We have to ask about the bank of mum and dad. That's the problem.
I think that's something else. So if you're buying a property with somebody, obviously there might be some various permutations around that. It might be just a person on their own. They might be buying together as a couple. They might be married. They might not be. They might be civil partners. There's all sorts of things and permutations there. And they might want a cohabitation agreement, something else that they might want to think about early doors in terms of sharing an asset between them potentially. So all other things that we could think about in the run-up to getting to that point where they've got the mortgage offer, they know where the money's coming from, they know how much money they're putting in themselves, and then, of course, the conveyancer is doing the conveyancing due diligence.
Well, it's a bit like fittings and contents. Any situation where you're buying with a partner or bank of mum and dad or anything, have the conversation. Don't presume anything. Have the conversation. Sometimes it's awkward. Having conversations about money is awkward, but fundamentally, this is a financial transaction. Have the conversation. Talk to mum and dad. Talk to your partner. Agree something. If you feel more comfortable having it in writing, have it in writing. That's what we do here. So you do need to think about these things, look down the road. Don't just presume it's like buying a pint of milk. It's a bit more involved.
Well, we've got a very strong private client team, very strong family team. We can look at all of those things, can't we? If people want that assistance.
That's one of the advantages of our firm. Bit of a plug here, is the fact that we are effectively a full-service firm. We can, if someone needs a cohabitation agreement, we can help with that. Wills, we can help with that. Even when acting for those very rare cases where bank of mum and dad is the only lender for a property, I have done these. I have done the loan agreements for the bank of mum and dad. But ultimately, it's about having the conversation and recording things properly so everyone is sure they know what they're agreeing to. That they think, oh, I thought we said that. Oh, no, because this is what you said. It avoids arguments.
Absolutely. So clarity on those things is really key early doors. So let's look at something else, though. So obviously buying a property, we talked about the fixtures, the fittings, the practical bits and pieces, and I think you've got to think about that as well. Perhaps in terms of what the lawyer does is checking out the title and the various questions that need to be asked. But what about the structure of the property itself? What else would we be advising someone to do?
Oh, I get my high-vis jacket on, I put the high hat on over my three-piece suit, and off I go to check the girders. No, unfortunately...
It's not what we do.
No, unfortunately, no. Beyond the fact that I wouldn't even know where to begin, our insurance doesn't cover it. If you were to take my advice...
To see you've not been out on site because it's Charlie.
Actually, I need to have a conversation about that, Mark. There's a few...
No, do that later.
No, obviously we're limiting the theoretical here to a house. But what I always tell my clients is that if you're buying a flat, it's lawyer first, surveyor second. If you're buying a house, it's the other way round. I can tell clients about the Prescription Act of 1832. I can talk to them about various rights and easements and case law, but I can't tell you if the roof's about to fall down. I can't tell you if that bit of damp is going to be a problem. I can't tell you if there's subsidence. And the buyer can't rely on anything the seller says either, because we still have in this country, which I think is a good thing, buyer beware. And when the Latin for that is, Mark?
Caveat emptor.
I can't pronounce that. It's embarrassingly, I can never pronounce that properly. So I always tell clients, get your surveyor in, get a full structural survey done. It's good for 3 reasons. The first is you've got a competent person looking at the building, giving you advice. Secondly, on the back of that advice, you may find, well, actually, we're going to need to fix this. That's $5,000. The roof needs $10,000. You can then renegotiate on purchase price. The third thing, and hopefully, touch wood, this never happens, if you were to miss something as a buyer, you were to miss the roof being leaky and you exchange your buyer, it's on your own head. You've missed it. Surveyor misses it. You can then rely on their report, you can then maybe bring a claim against them. Obviously, we never want that to happen, but there is an element of reinsurance there. It's not just doing it because, that's what people do. There is a value add to having a competent person go look at the building and do a full structural survey.
Yeah, definitely. I think all those practical aspects, which you're buying property warts and all, aren't you? At the end of the day, all of those physical attributes will come with when it's conveyed to you, and it will be your responsibility as the new owner. So definitely worth getting those things checked out.
Mark, you're obviously Mr. Section 42. You are an expert in leasehold law. You know that we very rarely ever leave the confines of Russell Square to go look at properties that we're involved in. Our involvement is normally looking at photographs, but 9 times out of 10 is two-dimensional plans with, especially in my case, dealing with older properties, with incredibly thick lines when you look at the scale, which is useful but never definitive. And I have had clients who have expected me to arrange a boiler to be serviced, or I sort of get, look, I can recommend people, or you can have a chat to your surveyor, but I wouldn't know where to begin. I could look at a boiler and go, yep, that looks like a boiler. What else do you want? No.
It's not our field, is it? So it's relevant to engage the relevant experts. I know there's practical things to do with the property. I think another good piece of advice is perhaps to actually go and talk to the neighbours, go and investigate the locality. Those things are
go at different times of day. I mean, just because you've seen a property at 11 o'clock in the morning, this looks quite nice. Go in the evening. See what's going on Saturday night, though. You never know. It could be very loud and leery. There could be a pub round the corner you've missed, though. There could be. In certain parts of more closer to London, though, you're actually quite close to a train line, and all of a sudden you realise, actually, I don't really like the noise. Or you might say, actually, I don't mind the noise, but I can use that as a way of getting a lower price. Find something which is, I've actually had a client, and his entire business strategy is to find properties that he knows for him and he deals with aren't really, he's not that bothered about, but he knows most people are bothered. So he bought a house very close to a train line, and he said, it's next to a train line, that's very difficult, I'll have to offer you a lower price. But then I went to him and said, do you care about the train? I said, no, it's fantastic. My commute's easier, but I'm using that to get a lower price. Practical considerations, sometimes much more important than legal.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the legal then. So before we can get to exchange of contracts, what needs to happen? Lots of questions need to be asked. Searches, what are those all about?
Well, ignoring the bank, the surveyor, bank of mum and dad, know your client, AML, the offer, the acceptance, there's a whole host of things you need to do. It really comes down to 2 things. First is the inquiries, the papers, the representations from the seller. There will be standard form documents they fill out, the TA6 property information form and the aforementioned fittings and contents form. It's one size fits all, and sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. There are gaps, there are bits missing, or sometimes the questions are so vague you need to ask clarifying questions. That's where I come in. I ask the questions, I get that information so you can rely on it. Just because an estate agent tells you something, or even a seller tells you something, doesn't necessarily mean you can rely on it. If they say, no, this is definitely the case, bring it to your lawyer and say, they've said this, nail them down. Get that in writing so you can get that information. The other part is what's called pre-exchange searches. Mostly it's going to the local authority, asking about planning, asking about building regulations, sometimes asking about enforcement. Going to, in London certainly, going to Thames Water. Is there a public sewer that runs through the back of the land? You need to know these things. This all comes together and we sort of get this raw data and information and we bring out what's called a report on title. All it really is our official advice to a client, because that's our job, to advise on here's everything, here's what it means. And at Bishop Sewell, I'm very proud about this, we actually do an executive summary, and sometimes we can boil it down to a simple answer to a simple question. Would Charlie Davidson buy this property? Because really, that's what clients want us to do. They want to say, well, what would you do if you were buying this property with all your years of experience? And we can say, yeah, I'd buy this property.
Well, you can up to a point, because of course it's ultimately the client's decision.
I'm not there.
You can be totally right.
To decide,
completely right. And people want to know with certainty whether they should jump or not jump on something, and their heart's been set on it. They're pursuing this dream, and obviously the dream can cloud them from some of the more black letter legal things that need to be considered.
There are times you need to draw people's attentions to big issues, and sometimes there are issues that need immediate attention. Sometimes that's going to be an issue in 5-10 years. You really need to think about this. The big one that's being pushed by our lords and masters of the Law Society is the big topic of climate change and how we need to advise on that. I'm not quite sure how we're supposed to advise on climate change beyond warning people that there might be more floods and or less floods, but we still have to flag these up to people.
That's right. There's lots of different searches to be done as well, depending where the property is. I mean, if it's near an area of tin mining, there's mining searches, all sorts of things that can come.
Oh, good old Cornish property with the tin mining.
Most of these won't be relevant to property in London, let's say.
No, I mean there are some searches which are one size fits all, but other ones are specific to the area which you're buying in. If you're buying more in the Midlands or up north, coal mining might be an issue, leading to subsidence. If you're buying near the Thames, you've got to think about flooding, for example, how often that happens. How difficult is it to get insurance? That's another thing you need to think about. The onward difficulties of owning a property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because ultimately one day you will no doubt want to sell or transfer it to somebody else potentially. So it's always a good idea to make sure that can happen.
And naturally, you're going to come back to Bishop and Sewell to do your
when you do that. Absolutely, yes. So let's move to exchange then. So, okay, the lawyers have got everything ready and they've satisfied themselves on all the questions, and you've got a lovely unconditional written mortgage offer with no particular conditions on it. You're happy to move ahead to draw down of the funds. What would you be telling someone who's about to exchange contracts?
Well, the exchange of contracts is the point of no return. It's the moment where you're crossing the Rubicon. You can't change your mind. The client, the buyer, you, dear listener, need to be 100% happy that you like the property, you understand everything about it. That's why I always tell clients, ask me the question. Don't think, oh, I'm sure it's fine. Ask the question. We've got your 10% deposit, your contractual deposit. We're holding it. We have your signed papers. We then go to you and say, right, we're ready to go. Everyone's agreed that we're completing on this date. Please tell me that I'm authorised to exchange contracts with this date as the completion date. And they come back and they say, hopefully, yes. It's always a bit of a letdown, really. Every time I bring in, obviously, a lot of junior people to train them on how to exchange contracts. So we're all taught it at law school. It's a relatively easy thing. You pick up the phone to the other solicitor. They'll have a copy of the contract, which is mirrored. It's signed, and you literally run through it on the phone. Fill in the dates. You give an undertaking that you'll swap, you will exchange the contracts.
That's where the word exchange comes from.
Yeah, and that's it. Every single junior I have trained over the years, when they see me do an exchange of contracts for the first time, I put the phone down, they look at me, is that it? And I go, yeah, that's it. We've just exchanged on their house. And they went, oh, I thought there'd be more.
More mystical, more glamour, indeed.
Well,
you'd see an attended exchange, couldn't you? You could go around physically to the other solicitors' offices and do it, or we could do it the old way. We take the bag of money round to the other solicitors and on completion and hand the documents over.
Definitely the exception to the rule, but it's a very mundane thing for such a monumentous thing, because ultimately people are happy to get the keys. But when you go to the exchange, you have clients have this wave of relief going, oh, thank God, it's over. We've exchanged. It's locked in.
That's the very important point, though, isn't it? That is moving day. Completion, obviously, so exchange, then completion. So what about the gap between the two? I mean, how long do people normally have?
Well, it used to be in the old days, it was 2 weeks, but the received wisdom, it's a week. Why a week, I hear you ask? It's because that's how long the bank needs to get us the money. That's generally it. As a rule, the parties can agree to any delay between exchange and completion. I've got one where a client advised me they need 2 years. I've got another one where we're exchanging and completing on the same day. So it is a movable feast. But and I call this dueling diaries, the difficulty is when you are trying to pick, I mean, the exchange date, you just exchange when you're ready, ultimately. But the completion date, that's difficult because not only do you, Mr. First-Time Buyer, need to agree your purchase, when you want to move in, the seller needs to agree. And then you've got all the other people who are buying and selling at the same time who all have their own competing interests. No, I'm going on holiday that day. My wife's very pregnant. My wife's more pregnant. I actually had that one once. And you need to decide when the date is. And that's why, and I'm very proud that we do this at Bishop & Sewell, we work very closely with the agents who put the deal together. We keep them on copy. We are always on the phone if they need us, because ultimately, as lawyers, we can only talk to our client and the other lawyer. We can't pick up the phone to the seller and demand, what do you think you're doing? No, that's not the game. But the estate agent, they can talk to everyone. Normally, they've got good relationships with the other agents on the chain, the buyers, the sellers, and they can have the deal to do with, though. We do not compete with estate agents. They do their part of the deal. We do our part of the deal. And you can't have an estate agent advising on legal matters, and you can't have a conveyancer putting a deal together. It doesn't work. They need to work together.
They are complementary, but different skills, aren't
they? And I don't understand where people butt heads. I really don't. I can understand why conveyancers get annoyed at some estate agents and vice versa. But you need to work together because we're all in the same profession, all in the same property industry. We need to work together
looking to achieve
for the client.
Yeah, quite. And completion, I mean, that is a difficult thing because obviously if there are lots of people who've got related transactions, you're a first-time buyer, just think about you're buying the property. It's all in that's your main concern. But ultimately, you're probably buying from someone who might need to buy something else. They've got to sell and they've got to buy, and this can go on and on and on up the so-called chain. And it's that art of bringing everyone together around a particular day, a particular crunch point, maybe whose need is greater. But that's where the skillful discussions take place.
Skillful discussions, and again, the upfront discussions, everyone needs to be clear about what is going on. People don't mind bad news. So there's a big difference between going to a client, in 2 weeks' time, something bad is going to happen, compared to going to a client, something bad is happening tomorrow. If you know something bad's happening, there's time to deal with it. But there is a reason why on our website we have a little video that sort of tries to explain in very basic terms the whole conveyancing transaction, how complicated it is. There's a reason it's shown as snakes and ladders. And there's also a reason why at the end of the video it shows that while you're moving along the board trying to get things sorted, so is everyone else. It becomes exponentially more complicated the more people are involved. It's one of the reasons why people like first-time buyers, because they have nothing to sell. They are sitting there ready to buy their first home.
Dream scenario.
That is the dream scenario.
For the seller, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So what else? Okay, so let's say we get to completion, obviously, and, bought the house of the dreams. What else should people be thinking about?
On completion, mostly the work will be done from a legal point of view. The money would have been paid over. The lawyers will then have the great fun of submitting the papers to HM Land Registry to get you registered as the new owner, which will take the fullness of time. Most buyers don't give a monkeys about that. And to be perfectly honest, I don't blame them. They've got more exciting things to be getting on with, though. So I always tell them, go in, read the meters, set up everything, get your council tax, think about changing the locks. Big thing, depending on where you are, though, make sure that you've got the papers so you can put your kids down for the local school, depending on where you are. Big thing I have, because there's a delay at the land registry, people are having difficulty getting their kids down for the local schools because they can't prove they own property in the area, they live in the area. Land registry is taking time. So again, no skin off our nose, we will very happily write a 2-minute who it may concern. We can confirm Mr. and Mrs. Smith own property in this catchment area.
Exactly. So that's what people are looking for. At the end of the day, they've bought the house and eventually the title will be updated and it'll be in their names and then happily ever after.
It's strange that it is a very human, emotional, big, sexy event. You're buying your first home or whatever, but you've got to go through this very alien, esoteric, legal process. I mean, one of our last senior partner, Mr. Gilman, he once berated me when I was very junior. He said that our job is not, as a conveyancer, he told me that my job is not to buy property, it's not to sell property. My job is to advise the client, to translate all this gobbledygook into plain English.
That's exactly it.
And that's the trick.
Yeah, it's the skill, isn't it? Absolutely. Well,
particularly if the property's got conveyance from, I think the oldest one I've got is 1750, which took me an hour to read the document, which said nothing of any use. But then the client can rely on me saying, I've read it, it's useless, ignore it, move on.
Indeed. And then, as you say, then they know that their peace of mind will then result.
That's the idea anyway, though. What the idea is, we want to take the stress out of conveyancing. So it will always be a little stressful. We're not magic. But the idea is you will feel a little bit easier, sleep a little bit better, knowing that we're on.
Exactly. You've got somebody competent on board to help you through the process, then you should end up with a less stressful result. Charlie, thank you very much for coming to talk to us, and we'll catch up on another episode soon.
Thank you, Mark.
That's all for today's episode of Listen Without Prejudice. Whether you're navigating a property transaction, a corporate, commercial, or family matter, we're here to guide you every step of the way. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on future episodes, where we'll continue to explore the latest trends and challenges across our core practice areas. Do you have a question or topics you'd like us to cover? Or do you want to reach one of our experts? Feel free to get in touch via LinkedIn or through our website, bishopandsewell.co.uk. Thanks again for tuning in. Be sure to join us in our next episode, where the conversation continues. Until then, take care.